to finally meet you. I've been watching so many of your videos, and honestly, your course I've been thinking about for a very long time. Like it was in the back of my mind for a very long time. Like, should I do this? Because I'll go into a little bit of a backstory of what I've been up to up until this point. But yeah, it was like it finding your course. I can't remember what it was. I think I found it I think I found you through YouTube, I think. And a friend of mine too, also, like, who knows, I've been studying for the LSAT and was like helping me out, was like, you should check out this guy. He sounds like he has like really cool, like free stuff online. And I was for a while like thinking, should I reach out? But then also I had so many other like things I was working on because I was working on another prep company like Seven Sage. And so I wanted to finish that. And it was until I noticed my score just wasn't improving. I knew I needed to change something. And I wasn't sure what to do, but I realized that, I could try my best to study for this test like for months, because I have been studying for this test for over a year. And I could continue on for a couple of months, but I don't have the time anymore. As much as I would love to think that I could do this on my own, I knew that I needed guidance, and I knew that I've seen that you've been working on this for 15, 20 years, I'm assuming. Yeah. So what better way to approach this than to ask someone who's done it before and who has helped people in the past? And that's why I'm here.
Sure. Well, I'm glad you reached out. I'm glad you joined the course. I'm glad we've got this call now. And I'd love to help you out however I can in terms of any struggles you're facing with your LSAT prep or any new opportunities that you'd like to unlock. Tell me what's going on and how I could help.
Yeah. So, okay. So like I mentioned, I've been studying for this test for about a year or so. I don't think I was studying for the test the right way. That may be because I used to be a science major. So I took this test like I would any other science test, where I thought I could, with time and with the effort that I was putting in, like I could memorize the fundamentals and take this test and do really well. But this isn't that kind of test at all. And I think I have a really good fundamental. That's because every time I tried a new prep course, I focused heavily on how to tackle each question. So for example, LR, I have a really good fundamental. I know exactly what my task is. I know how to answer the question, but it's really about the timing. My timing is not there. I know that. And I wasn't really doing the Socratic review method at all. So I would just look at how other people explain that specific question that I had a difficulty with, and I would understand it. But the second I would try that question again, I would get it wrong. And so I realized it had to come from me thinking critically again and really thinking why I'm doing this right, or why did I get this question right, or why did I get it wrong, and what made the right answer not appealing, what made the wrong answer appealing. So I went through that, and I actually did a month of your course, and that helped me a lot. It really, really did. Like, I started like a wrong answer journal, and I started really questioning why I was picking those answer choices. And it really made me think I started noticing a little bit of the patterns in the LR questions, at least. And that helped me a lot. But my thing is reading comprehension. I haven't figured that out. And that's my biggest weakness right now, reading comprehension. I'm not really sure what I should be doing. I know that I have to admit that I haven't been working at it as much as I've been working at the other two sections. And so I was hoping maybe you could help me, or maybe give me some confidence, because I know how it is when you hear people online saying things like reading comprehension is the hardest to improve on. And, there might not be a chance you make it if you can't read fast enough. And I'm not going to listen to any of that. I want to improve on it. And I think there's a way to figure it out. I just haven't figured it out yet.
Sure. Well, I can definitely help you with that. And one thing I'll say is that let's take a moment to slow down and celebrate you for your accomplishments thus far. you've improved significantly. You've taken the Socratic review method, and I could say how great the method is, but it's more that you took it and that you applied the method consistently to the fullest extent possible, and you saw the results. So let's see now, what can we do to take the insights you gained there for LR and now apply them to reading comp? Because despite what people say about reading comp, it actually has a lot in common with logical reasoning. The reading comp passage is like a big, big stimulus, but it is susceptible to the same techniques you've already used for logical reasoning. We just have to see how can we highlight those similarities and then apply them to reading comp.
Yeah, for me, it feels like a whole different section. The reading comp section just seems like a whole dense passage that I have such limited time to finish, and I read it with, and I know I was reading it wrong for a very long time. I tried to understand each and every word, and I was like, I can't understand this word. I need to understand what it is before I can move on. But I know that that's not, they do that on purpose. So I know now that there's a way to read it. I haven't figured it out yet. So I'm still taking like maybe 5 to 6 minutes to finish, like even an easy passage, really.
I hear you. Okay. So you know that reading word by word, line by line, and trying to understand it all on the initial read is not the way to go. It takes far too long, and you don't need to understand it with that level of granularity on the initial read. So we have to decide instead, what's the alternative? After you read the passage, what do you want to walk away from it with? What's the key number one thing, if nothing else, you want to know? It's the main idea. Yeah, exactly. It's the main idea. It's the main point. You walk away with that alone, you can likely solve a couple of questions already. Then the nitty gritty details, you can go back and find those when you need to. You may have heard me say this before already, though, so I want to go deeper with you in terms of how can you learn to review better reading comp the same way that you've learned to review better with logical reasoning, because a lot of it's the same. Just like there's a Socratic review method for logical reasoning, there's also a Socratic review method for reading comprehension. And just like I cover it way in depth in the course for LR, I do the same for reading comp. Have you had a chance to watch any of the reading comp deep dive videos in the course?
I did. I watched a couple. I watched the one where you broke down like a philosophy passage. It had nothing to do with the LSAT, but you wanted everyone to kind of just read it and see how they kind of take from that. And that was difficult for me. I did take a while, but I did realize what you were trying to do. It's not about understanding their ideas and understanding every single detail. It's really understanding the argument structure and where to find things. I guess it's just, I still find that I'm reading slower than usual, and the questions too, maybe I'm having a little bit of difficulty with, but that's also, again, I have to admit, I haven't been working as hard on reading comprehension as I have been on the other two sections, because I don't really know what I should be doing.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's go beyond the philosophy example I shared in that class was mainly to show you how, in contrast to The Economist or Scientific American, real LSAT passages are way, way harder. And a dense philosophy text is even harder than the LSAT. So the LSAT isn't as bad as it could be, but they do word things in a very specific way. They're looking to pull the wool over your eyes and distract you from what really matters about the passage. And if you can just slow down, focus on what you need to, it becomes a lot easier. So one thing I'll do in these deep dive classes is I'll just help you hone in on what's the main idea. Let's boil that down. Let's paraphrase that. The details, I can help you break those down too, but you don't need to do that on the initial read. So let's slow down on anything general where they're describing the main idea, the primary purpose, the author's opinion, somebody else's opinion. Go deep on those, make sure you get them fully. And if it's not clicking for you, how can we give you a real world relatable example to help you get a better grasp on it? How can we put it in simpler language? How can we caricature the viewpoints in the passage to relate them to something that you're already familiar with?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so I guess when I'm drilling RC passages, which I'm sure you will suggest that I continue drilling more RC passages, which I have been. I've been doing it timed, but I will give myself extra time if I need. So I know because it's a harder section for me, and I don't want to discourage myself if I don't get the questions right with the time being like a factor, right? So I'll increase the time if I need, and that's fine. But the way I'm reviewing it currently is so after I'm done with the questions, I'll blind review it. I won't check my answers, and I'll kind of take each paragraph and do a summary of it. I'll do like a low resolution summary of each paragraph, and then I'll find the main point. Like I'll try to find the author's tone and the organization. And then like I'll go through the questions that I changed my answer to, and really what my thought process was on those questions. But I don't know necessarily if it's been helpful. And this isn't I don't think this was the Socratic review method. I think this was just me changing my answer and really thinking about why I chose that answer. But I never went back when I found my answer to be wrong and why I chose that answer, because I always thought reading comprehension was, you're comprehending the passage. So if you can't answer the question, maybe you didn't comprehend the passage. But I know that's not necessarily the case now, because they'll try to trick you with some questions. But I guess I was wondering, like, what do you think I should be doing? Should I just be focusing on like the easier passages without time and really like just analyzing each paragraph and then trying out the questions? Or do you think I should just go into the drills and then do the thing I've been doing, but maybe put in the Socratic review method as well?
Well, let me take a step back and ask you, what's your target test date?
So I'm aiming for March. I did push back from February, but I am aiming for March. And I'm willing to push it back to April if need be, because I am focused on getting my goal score at the end of the day. So, and I know now that since I'm applying for the next cycle anyway, it's more than likely if I have to push it a month or two, it should be fine, because I'm still applying for the next cycle anyway.
Okay, that's great to hear. So you've got some time. So if you were taking it in February, I would have said we need to get to time section sooner, but you've got time to slow down and do this the ideal way, which is awesome. So I do think that focusing on accuracy for now over timing is a good way to go, since this is an area that you want to go deeper on. So yes, I would give yourself the time that you need to complete a given set of passage plus questions to solve it all the way to the end. The review elements that you described are all worth doing. There's more I would add on to that and other ways I would look at it, but what you're doing there is good. But as you said, analyzing the questions isn't enough if something might have been lacking in the understanding of the passage. A lot of times people will miss a whole set of questions associated with a given passage because that was a hard passage and you didn't fully grasp the topic or the main idea to begin with. And so we need to start there. And that's why in these deep dive classes, I might spend an entire class breaking down the passage in simpler language, not even covering the questions, but just rewriting the entire thing, looking at the simple structure, and then layering on top of that a more complex structure, kind of like the low res, high res you were talking about. So how can we explain this to a 5-year-old? And if you can do that, then you're in a much better position. But I would start there, not even the questions yet.
Okay. So really analyzing the passage itself and then going into the questions. And then the questions is another. Should I be looking at the questions as another thing I have to train myself on? Like, maybe that's a harder question to explain. But I know there's the comprehending the passage, and then there's the questions. There's specific kind of questions. But is it like LR where there's definitely like a way to answer specific questions, or is it more so when you comprehend the passages that the answers kind of just make sense?
The question stem type isn't as much of a focus in reading comprehension because the questions they ask you are likely a little bit more straightforward than what you see in LR. Like for LR, it's important to get a grasp on what is necessary assumption versus sufficient assumption because hardly anybody's ever seen that before, right? That's something totally new. But what's the main idea is a pretty straightforward question. There are a couple of questions in reading comp, the toughest ones that are analogous to logical reasoning,
Mhm.
but those are a lot less common. I would say you have for reading comp, you have the global main idea style questions. You then have local detail oriented questions where they'll highlight it in turquoise in the question stem and then also in the passage. And then you have the tougher inferential ones that require reading between the lines, but I wouldn't drill reading comp question stems by type or anything like that. I would, and when you talk about should I drill reading comp in general, I don't think that you need to necessarily maximize the number of passages that you cover. I do want you to cover a lot of them, but I want you to focus on what are the passages that give you trouble and review those in depth, both with a passage centric approach first and then question centric after you make sure that you fully got the passage down.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll continue doing that. And I think I will focus more on the passages as I move forward. And then so two more questions on RC, because I really want to get this covered. I want to do better on RC, and I know that's my biggest weakness. But I wanted to know, for someone like me, do you think it would be, would you recommend that I do outside reading as well? Or is that not as helpful for someone with a timeline like mine?
I would stick with LSAT passages. You've got about 2 months remaining, and there's about 400 passages with 100 exams. So I don't think you're going to need to go beyond that. I would just make sure that you cover as many of the more recent passages as possible. That'll be more than enough.
Okay, thank you. And then I was wondering about the comparative passages. Is there a different way? Would you do it would you be doing anything different for the comparative passages as you would be doing for the other ones? Because I know there's the two passages that you kind of have to understand. You have to understand if they're what they agree on, what they disagree on, and what the central idea is for both. I kind of do it where I read passage A and then I answer the questions related to passage A as best as I can. So even if it doesn't talk about passage A, but it'll talk about both, I'll eliminate the answer choices that I know weren't talked about in passage A. And then I'll go to passage B and then see what I have left. And that's been good. But again, I'm not finishing the whole reading comp section, so I don't know if that's the best way to do it.
Will, do you feel like that method is working for you on the comparative passages specifically?
Yeah, kind of. It has been actually. I mean, majority of the time it has. I think one time it didn't. And I was like, wait, what happened here? Like, it didn't make any sense. I was sure about my answers at that time too. So I think it was just the passages were a little bit more difficult. So I think there was a misunderstanding. So I thought I had the answers, but maybe it was just a tougher comparative passage. But I find that helps me keep everything in my head because I'm reading two different passages. So doing that where I answer passage A questions first has helped me. But I was wondering if that's a good way to do it, or
yeah, that's a reasonable approach. Yeah.
Okay. Because I know there's no right way of doing anything. I mean, everyone has their own way of doing it, but I was wondering if that was not the right way. Maybe there would be like questions that would, trip me up because they know that some students would be doing that. I don't know.
No, I think that's a perfectly fine approach. It works for a number of people. It sounds like the time it didn't work was just because it was a hard set of passages. So I think that I would probably focus more on the longer passages where the complexity tends to become a bit greater and nail those down, since that's 3/4 of what you're going to see.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you. I'll work on RC. We'll see how that goes. And like I was mentioning, so now let's talk about LR. LR is much better. So I think I would get lucky before. And then now I see my reasoning. I know why I'm getting them wrong. But there are times I will get like easier questions wrong. And so those I'll really think about why I got them wrong. But I have noticed, so the first 10 or 12 questions, I'll go by them and it's been really good so far. It's always the after 12 questions that I'm not really sure about. And those are the ones that I noticed get a little bit harder. So I was wondering, I know I'm doing the Socratic review method now for each of those questions, but is there anything else that I should be doing besides that would ensure that I'm doing it the right way. I mean, again, I know there's no right way of doing things, but I guess my question for you is, besides the Socratic review method, should I be doing anything else for those harder questions?
I would look into drilling any question types that you find difficult in particular. The review method is the number one thing that you can do, and I would continue watching the logical reasoning workshops in the course to see me apply it in different contexts. But aside from that, I would just look into, is there a certain question type that gives you trouble, and work on that on the side and watch the classes related to that too. Does anything come to mind in terms of a certain question type or a certain method of reasoning?
Um, no, actually, it's like it's always different questions sometimes. Like I think like if there's four flaw questions, I'll get three right, one wrong. So it's like it's not very it's not very consistent. But I guess maybe weakening questions at times will give me some trouble. Strengthening questions. I have noticed that I've been getting a lot better at the necessary assumption questions after going through your foundational course. I started looking at them as a must be true assumption questions. And I never looked at it like that before. And I've done many different, I'm not joking when I say this, I've done so many different courses. And each one, I think, I started getting overwhelmed with the different ways to do them. And I wasn't doing it my way until I saw your foundational thing. And I noticed that my thinking about necessary assumption questions started becoming a lot more intuitive almost. I started knowing when questions were strengthening but not necessary. When before I remember reading about necessary assumption questions, the first time I ever read about it. And they were like, the answer choices, they would say like, this was the wrong answer because it strengthens, but it's not necessary. And to me, I'm like, what do you mean it strengthens, but it's not necessary? It didn't make any sense to me, but now it's clicking and I understand necessary assumption questions. But I also have, I'm very, okay, I'll give myself credit. I'm pretty good at conditionals. Like I'm very good at like writing things out, but that also could be a bad thing because I noticed that I focus on it too much at times. I know some people are like, oh, I can't write it out. I can write it out, but it takes me a really long time. I noticed like for must be true questions, for example. So do you have any tips for that? Do you think I should work on getting faster at that? Or do you think I need to change my way of thinking a little bit so I don't have to depend on that too much?
Great question. So it sounds like in terms of question types in general, there may not be any one question type that deserves a lot of extra focus. Sometimes you're just getting hard questions wrong because they're hard. And that's where more review and more practice and more exposure comes in. But regarding your question about diagramming, one thing I'll say is that students tend to overuse diagramming as a technique for LR. There are very, very few question types where diagramming is actually useful. Hey, you're not the only one. So many students, because when it works, it's magic. It just unlocks the answer. You see it in many cases for sufficient assumption questions. Some must be trues, some parallels, but you've got to apply it only when it actually is applicable, only when it can actually be useful. Sometimes you have that diagramming as a technique, and then when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So we have to see what are the situations in which diagramming is useful and in which cases will it not be useful. I find that it's most useful when you have lots of conditional statements written in a very tight way, like a math problem, like a logic games problem, the way that a computer would talk, not the way a person would talk, where you can easily imagine subbing in different variables for what they're saying. That's when it's helpful. Otherwise, you're more likely looking at informal logic where you've got to relate to it in a real world way, like you were actually having a conversation with somebody.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's a really good explanation. I do notice there are questions that are a bit logic heavy where you would kind of need to write it down. There are some that aren't. And for someone who uses conditionals a lot, I tend to fall back on that because I'm like, I know how to do it. Maybe I can do it fast. And that would take up a lot of my time from the exam that I could be using on other questions that need more time. But Okay, so my question, I thought of this question on the fly. I'm just asking, what what worked for you when you were taking the LSAT? What did you notice that clicked for you when you were studying and you took the and you were studying for the LR section? Was there like something that I'm sure it wasn't just one thing, but what did you notice or what worked for you that you noticed improvements in your score, but understanding of that section?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing I'll say is learning to take fewer exams, do fewer problems, and review in more depth. There's this addiction to doing questions and getting that feedback and seeing, did I go up? Did I go down? What went well? What didn't go well? But the why is more important. So rather than taking exam after exam 3 times a week or every day, sometimes just even doing one exam a week and then spending the remainder of that week reviewing that exam in depth from every angle. And I took the LSAT back when there were 2 score logical reasoning sections. So I was always doing those 2 LRs. And I thought to myself back then, well, I should focus on LR because any gains I make get doubled because it's half the exam. So you're asking about LR, so this fits. I noticed the trends in the mistakes I was making, but also the trends in the stimulus. The kinds of methods of reasoning that they use show up again and again and again. You see it especially with things like correlation causation flaws and that kind of reasoning, the ways they problematize it. And so if you have a really solid understanding of the methods of reasoning that show up most consistently, you're in a much better position because you're not interpreting it for the first time on test day. It's like if you've seen the plot of a movie before, you then see the sequel or the remake, you're already exposed to the plot line from before. You're definitely going to understand it the next time. It may not be as enjoyable or as novel the second time, but you already, at least, you're not going to misunderstand what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's why Hollywood likes this, because they've got the built-in audience. And so if you are already built to understand a method of reasoning because you've seen it 10 times, 20 times, you're seeing it for the 100th time on test day, there's no way you're getting that wrong. And there are lots and lots of methods of reasoning out there. There's seemingly infinite because arguments are complex. There's a lot of arguments out there. But the more you can expose yourself to them and the more questions you do where you're going to see less and less frequent methods of reasoning, you're building up your library of knowledge so that eventually, imagine if you did every exam ever released or the most recent 50, you would be in a great position on test day because you would have seen pretty much anything likely to come up. Some arguments come up every single exam. Some come up 3 times an exam. Some come up once every 5 exams. But if you've done 5 exams, you've probably seen it at least once. If you've done 10 exams, you might have seen it twice. So the idea is just the exposure can really help. And when I got to the point where I've seen every argument imaginable, I'm at least primed to get it right. I'm not guaranteed, but I'm in a pretty good position where I'm likely going to get it right. Or if I get it wrong, it won't be for that reason. It'll be because it was with the veneer of science on top and I don't like science, for example. That's one reason it might happen. Then you look at the other tricks and traps that LSAC throws at you. And if you can learn to spot those and avoid them, and you've seen it before, like unlike Charlie Brown and Lucy in the football, if you've seen that trick before, you're not going to fall for it.
Right. Yeah. I have, that was a great explanation. And that was a great tip that you just gave. And I do see what you're talking about. I started noticing it now, like the patterns and I noticed the way they're writing the arguments, they do come up again. So I do, if this was me a couple of months ago, I would have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, I don't see the patterns. I just don't. But I do see it now. And I get what you're saying. I'm being more patient in that I know my scores really just not changing. But I think with more time and more practice, I will see improvements. I did come so far with a diagnostic of 140. So I know it's there and I know the test is learnable. I just want to know I'm going about it the right way. and that I'm not wasting my time or taking too long, because I know people who have studied for a very long time because they didn't know how to study for it the right way. And there was people who studied for it in much like less time, and they knew what they were doing. Which comes back to, I have one more question for you, and it's that I want to know how to structure my study plan, or like a plan of attack for the LSAT. I usually am just drilling questions, so I'll try to like mix it up. I'll do like RC and LG one day. I'll do RC, LR, or LR and LG the other day, and then I'll do a practice test like once a week. But I was wondering if there was something for someone like me who has my LG is my strongest section, and I would say RC is my weakest section. What do you think I should be doing within like with my weeks? Is there something I should be doing that's different than I'm doing right now?
Your approach overall sounds good. I might tweak it a little bit, though. I think one exam a week is a good rule of thumb for you, because it sounds like you already have a good foundation. You're already familiar with the different sections, the different question types. So now it's time to work more on pacing and endurance overall. And you've got 2 months, which is a good amount of time, at least 2 months, really. So you have enough time to apply everything that we're talking about in today's conversation, which is really exciting. Sometimes I'm talking to people like the week before their exam, and we can talk about final week study plan, but there's not as much time to implement these deeper strategies like reviewing better. So my recommendation for you is maintain the exam once a week. Make sure that you level up your review of that exam, especially with regard to the reading comprehension. And watch any of the course lesson videos you may have missed, the full-length class recordings covering reading comp, to see those walkthroughs, to see those deep dives. Then I would recommend any additional work that you do on the side, aside from that full-length exam plus the review, would be to do some more reading comp passages. You don't need to do logic games on this side because you're already covering them in those exams and you're feeling pretty good about it. So maybe you're doing 1 exam a week plus the review of that exam plus 2 reading comp sections plus 1 logical reasoning section, and maintain that ratio if you have the time to do additional drilling on the side. I'd also suggest come to the live classes, come to the reading comp classes, come to the reading comp study groups in particular. They're every Monday night. So every Monday night, 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. Eastern, you can show up, bring your questions, interact with others, show your techniques, learn from their techniques. You can also request topics to be covered in future reading comp classes. So I would definitely recommend taking advantage. You don't need to attend the logic games classes, of course, but the reading comp and the logical reasoning as well, I would definitely consider if you can.
I will. Thank you so much. I want to say thank you again. You answered every one of my questions. And I am looking forward. I am very, very motivated. I always get like this when I get like a new prep or a new course, or, when I feel like I'm going, or I'm thinking about how my scores not improving. I know that because it's been like that for a while, I know it's going to increase a little bit. I just have to be a little bit more patient. And I know that I am putting in the work, so I will see improvements. I just have to be a bit more patient. So yeah, it could be a little demotivating sometimes. It could be a little bit difficult, but I just needed to know I was going about it the right way, and that I wasn't wasting my time, and that I wasn't doing the wrong thing and taking an extra months and pushing my exam. That's what happened. That's why I was studying for about a year or so. I kept having to push my exam back because I wasn't getting the results I wanted. But I am seeing improvements, and I know I'm understanding the exam a little bit better. I just wanted to make sure I was structuring it the right way. And I felt like this conversation was very helpful. I learned a lot, and I know that at least I'm going about it the right way, and I know what I should be doing. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And I'll definitely be joining the live classes.
Of course. No, I'm so glad to have had the chance to meet with you today. I'm so glad to help. And you're asking all the right questions. You're doing all the right things, and you are seeing results. And now, since you have more time and you want to improve further, we're going to give you some new techniques to try out and apply and drill and review more. And then you'll see what your results are. Come back to me. We'll have another conversation. We'll go deeper on it. I'm glad to help. And I sense your dedication. You're willing to put in the work. You're showing up powerfully. And so I'm excited for you. I'm excited to see what happens. Keep me posted.
Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.